we've extended the security and fundamental right to affordable, accessible health care to more than 10 million uninsured Americans.
I wanted to ask about the 800,000 Americans who won't be able to file their taxes on time because the government sent them incorrect tax information after they bought insurance through healthcare.gov.
This should have no impact on the ability of people to file their taxes on time. So we're talking about a very small fraction of people who are affected.
800,000 people is not a very small amount of people, though.
It's a small percentage of overall tax filers. We're talking about less than 1% of people who file taxes.
Yes, but 800,000 people are getting the wrong tax information in an already very complicated scenario with Obamacare and the IRS. Reaction quickly from House Republicans and Senate Republicans. Marsha Blackburn saying, quote, surprise, surprise, the Obama administration still does not have its act together. Not that we needed it, but this is just more proof why Obamacare's insertion of the IRS into healthcare decisions of Americans was a colossal blunder. And Senator Barrasso in the Senate saying this tax filing season is the first time that many Americans will learn of the individual mandate penalty and feel its pain. The new special enrollment period won't hide the fact that Obamacare costs too much and makes it harder for Americans to get the care they need. With that, let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, Julie Pace, White House correspondent for the Associated Press, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Julie, I saw in the briefing room there, Josh Earnest trying to say this is a small percentage of overall tax filers, yet kind of an issue with Obamacare and tax filing season.
Yeah, and it's a big number. I mean, anybody, you'd ask any person on the street, is 800,000 a big number? It's a big number. And the problem for the White House is that they actually are coming off a strong enrollment period here. You heard the president talking about this. They want to be out there selling the fact that 11 million people have enrolled, and every time they say that, there's going to be this asterisk that 800,000 people have had this tax issue. And it just reinforces this idea that this program has technical issues with it, and that if you are someone who enrolls, you run the risk of having some kind of issue, either with your health care or possibly with your taxes.
Steve.
Well, 1% of overall tax filers, 20% of those eligible for these credits. That's a big number. That's a high percentage. I think the problem, among the many problems beyond just the numbers of this, is that this comes as we're learning that the back end of the Obamacare, the healthcare.gov website, is still not built. I mean, it seems to me that should be a bigger story than it already is. The fact that more than a year later, after the debacle that was the Obamacare rollout, the back end of the Obamacare website is still not built. According to Reason Magazine's Peter Suderman, you still have insurance companies making their calculations manually a year beyond the original rollout. That's a huge story in and of itself. This just adds to the problems.
Added to that, you have the Urban Institute, Charles, which says that 4 in 10 of uninsured really still don't get that they're going to be penalized when they don't sign up for insurance this year.
Which is why the administration has unilaterally created a new enrollment period, contrary to what's written in the law. This is, we lost the count of the number of times the White House and the administration have revised their own law unlawfully, because it's supposed to be done by Congress. And this is yet another example of the law's complexity and difficulty, leading to consequences which were utterly predictable. So many people are going to get the penalty sort of unbeknownst and are going to be surprised. And it's also a reflection of the unbelievable complexity of a law that was intended to remake 1/6 of the American economy, and as a result you get the glitches, you get the incompetence, and now you're going to get this unilateral creation of a new period that is nowhere in the law and is of extremely dubious legality.
Here are two sides looking at this analysis of this particular issue.
Anytime you sort of overhaul a major system in this country, healthcare being one of them, right, you're going to have some glitches in the system. And I think the White House and the HHS is working really, really hard to correct those glitches, but they're going to have problems. They're going to have speed bumps.
This is an example of why this whole legislation was way too complicated and way too complex to start with. You know, even if you fix the glitches and the mistakes, the thing is still going to be an administrative nightmare, and it's going to drive people crazy at tax time.
So, Julie, the question is, politically, obviously there are good things with Obamacare that the administration touts, but politically it seems to be more and more that Democrats are saying, you know, we need to fix this thing.
Well, and again, it's just, if you're a Democrat, you want to be out there touting things that are positive about the law and that you think people will vote for you as a result of. And every time something like this happens, it makes it harder for you to do that and make a clean argument on this. And we saw this last year in the lead up to the midterms, and certainly if, you know, Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee, she's going to be keeping her fingers crossed in the lead up to the 2016 election, hoping that there's not another glitch, something that, you know, maybe now we're not even talking about that could arise in another year or
Well,
two.
like the back end of the website. I mean, this is an albatross for a Democratic nominee.
Well, look, I mean, just on the specifics of it, I spent a half hour on the phone with a guy who's a specialist on Obamacare and specifically, and is also a tax preparer, and he walked me through sort of how the system works. If this system had worked perfectly, where you have these 3 columns of numbers, including the silver plan number, which was the missing number which caused this problem, this glitch, which is more than a glitch, if it works perfectly, it's so unbelievably complicated that there's no way the average taxpayer can figure it out, much less tax professionals. And that's if it's working well. That's one element of this broader reform. We're talking about thousands of these different kinds of programs. It's totally incomprehensible, even for the professionals. The IRS is at a time where it's cutting staff, its funding is getting cut, and it's going to need more people in order to just make sense of this thing.
And we already have a complex tax system, and that's one of the things that candidates talk about is simplifying the system. But this actually adds another layer.
Absolutely, and it's sort of it's a collision of 2 levels of complexity, which in and of themselves are incomprehensible. And that was the original sin of this whole idea. Obama pretends it was just a way to extend insurance to those who didn't have it. If that's what he wanted to do, there were very specific and limited ways you could have done it. Instead, as we heard your Democratic apologist earlier explain, this is what happened when you overhaul an entire system. That's exactly the point. You don't remake American medicine. Talk to any doctor about the effect on his practice of the mandate for electronic records and how, as a theoretical idea, it was a great idea of experts in D.C. It is a disaster in the field. That's one of 100 examples of complexity added onto this, entirely sort of arrogantly and wantonly, Gruber-like, if you like.
Strong letter to follow.
Absolutely.
Next up, the Friday.
Otherwise, it's a great plan.
Otherwise, it's perfect. Next up, the Friday lightning round and the candidate casino.